Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, a podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. And now your host, David Ginsburg.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Tales from the Fandom. Today, I'm joined by somebody off of the Twitterverse that I have been excited not only to follow, but to have come on to the show today. I am joined by Persephiroth, and you may have heard her voice on some Twitch channels or on the newest podcast out there, Fast Times at D&D High. Welcome to the episode, or welcome to the podcast, Persephiroth.
I'm happy to be in the episode. Hi, I'm Persephiroth. My real name is Persephone. I am a DM, cosplayer, model, oftentimes ranter on Twitter. Yeah, I do a bunch of disparate things.
You wear a bunch of hats.
I wear a bunch of hats, except it's more like skimpy lingerie that I then photograph and put on the internet.
There were some, I can't remember, it must have been a couple months ago, and you had posted some photos of like characters that you were working on and the different costumes or outfits that they were wearing, and I was like, dang, like not only like the style, but just like the way the pictures came out, everything. It was so perfect.
Thank you. That was probably, there was a tag that went around on Instagram and Facebook a while ago that was make yourself into a gym leader. And I just took it to the extreme and like made a bunch of characters for each gym leader type and then wrote a bunch of lore to go with it. Cause I don't like Pokemon, and I don't mean the creatures because I love the creatures and I used to love the games, but the games bore me. So I was like, I'm going to turn this into something that would actually get me to play Pokemon again. So I created this whole like film noir / like punk revolution sort of like opposing teams, and made a bunch of different outfits and styled them and just like went from there.
That's what it was, because those I love like I love when people get to do like noir photography and that kind of style, and I loved reading the different lore that you had come up with for them. And I also have to agree that while I love Pokemon, as do my kids, I could not sit there for hours either grinding to level or to shiny hunt or any of that stuff. It is not for me.
It is, but the way to get someone to play a long RPG is to make the characters and story interesting. And Pokemon doesn't really have that. Like, it has an interesting visual cast of characters, and keep in mind I haven't played the new ones, but no one's really recurring. You can't really get attached to them. I think they might have changed that in the most recent one, but it's still not enough story for me to like sink my teeth into. So I always wanted just more from the Pokemon universe.
Mm-hmm. I can tell you from watching streamers stream the newest one that there is no recurring characters from anything like previously, so it's all new yet again.
Well, I meant that the characters within the game seem to turn up more, at least a little bit. Like, not recurring characters from previous games. They've only done that a select few times, like with Cynthia, I believe. But like some of them seem to like come and go and make a few appearances over time, like Marnie and some other few. I don't remember.
Gotcha.
I have no interest in playing Pokemon anymore.
Gotcha. Yeah, I totally understand that. But yeah, your noir photography, loved it. Loved the lore that you were putting out there. I remember reading and it was just like blown away by what you had created.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun. It's on hiatus for now, but it will start up again probably in August when I take a break from recording my podcast.
Awesome. And we'll be talking about that near the end of the episode. There is a video game series that I have not played, but I have had a number of people around me play the series and get really into it. And I'm very much interested in hearing your thoughts about it. And that is the Persona series.
Oh, God. The Persona series. I fucking love the Persona series so much. I have played 3, 4, 5, and I've played the enhanced versions of each game, including the Persona 3, not remake, but when they ported it to the PSP, they also made a version where you could play a female protagonist, which they should do again. but I did not play 1 and 2 because I no longer have the systems to play it on, and I'm too lazy to emulate right now. But really, the like storyline of the Persona series, the sort of moment where it catches its breath, from what I understand, where it like finally comes to a sort of cohesive whole, is with 3. And they've sort of kept similar themes between 3, 4, and 5, like the black and white sort of like color scheme with being enhanced by one color. Persona 3's is blue, Persona 4's is yellow, and Persona 5's is red. Then there's also the battle system is an enhanced version of what exists in 1 and 2, and 2 is actually 2 games, I believe. And they all take place in the same universe. Like there's references to 1 and 2 and a few of the games, and references to 3 and 4 and 5 and stuff like that. They all take over like a period of 30 years, I think. But when I say they're related to each other, it's more like there are references. Like you don't need to play anyone in successive order. They're not that interlinked. Like you can pick up Persona 5 now and be perfectly fine to play it.
Okay.
You just won't get some of the like the references are just Easter eggs. Like there's a poster of a pop star that's a main character in 4 in 5. So it's not really need to know information.
What drew you to the Persona series to start with? Because it's one where I know I've had friends play it, but they were never like, oh, you need to try this game. They just were like, oh yeah, I've played the game. And it's only recently that I've kind of talked with people that are really into the series.
I actually got into Persona from the influence of my friend Andy. I wish that I had started playing these games when they came out. Like 3 came out when I was in 8th grade or maybe my freshman year of high school, and I would have adored them then. But I didn't play them until I was about 23 or 24. And by the time I started playing them, Persona 5 was due to come out. And I fell in love with it. The first game that I played was 3. And I played Persona 3 FES, which is the second enhanced version, but not the PSP version. And I will honestly say that it's not a game I would recommend for everyone, because 3 is probably the most upsetting and dark game in the series. None of them shy away from hard themes. Like Persona 3 is about the process of grieving and mourning and death. Death is the main theme of the game. And then 4 is about like the discovery of self and the acceptance of self. And then 5 is about rebellion. And each one in its own way handles very hard subjects. Sometimes not as thoroughly as I'd like. But they do handle them in ways that are much more mature than you get from other games. And honestly, even 4, which is considered the lightest game in the series, starts with there is a suicide at one point early in game, and it's a lot. Or I should say, what appears to be a suicide. It's a very heavy series, but so fantastically good. It's the same. I play those games for the same reason that some people watch like audio dramas. Watch audio dramas. Watch like dramas on TV or anything like that. Like it's just so in depth to sink into. Plus, it has a mythological and tarot basis that also interests me as like a queer person, just in general, because there's really no way to escape like fortune telling in the queer community or like astrology or anything. And I adore anything that has those kind of themes.
What was the hook for you, like when you started 3? Was it like the actual like the heaviness of the story, that it's this story that you just, I mean, is just like it hooked you and you're in? Did it take some time once you got started with the game before like the it factor grabbed you?
No. The thing about Persona is the mystery factor. You are always thrown into the game in medias res, which means like in the middle of the action, and you don't necessarily know that's what's happening, but you also have no idea what's going on. Like the first the first few moments of Persona 3, your main character is coming into town to go to a dorm, and freaky stuff starts happening. In 4, you are a transfer student being sent to a country town for a reason that's not really explained, to live with your uncle. And then in 5, your main character is a delinquent that has been sent away. Being sent away from places and having the protagonist be displaced is a big part of the game. The protagonist explores the area and the events of the game as a new eye, just like the player, which is a good mirroring aspect. But as far as what actually hooked me, it's the characters. Persona has some of the most memorable and endearing and well-rounded characters in video games that I've ever encountered. Even the main characters, who are all silent protagonists, have their own personalities. Like the main character from 3 is very somber in a way, and his reactions to things are different than the protagonist in 4, who is very stoic and caring and almost fatherly, even though you are picking every one of his interactions, like who he interacts with and what he says when there's options. There's still a feeling of like, this guy cares a lot about the people around him. And then in 5, you play a really mischievous but really good at hiding it kid who's just getting shit on by everyone. And like, you meet all these characters that are tangled up in these mysteries or these things that are happening, and each one of them is given their own focus, is given their own time, is given their own sort of ways to develop in a way that's, for video games, extremely masterful. Not that video games can't have that, just they're not like the Final Fantasy series, especially the later ones. Like with 8, for example, I'll just use 8 as an example. Like the attention is paid mostly to Squall and Renoa. And then after a certain point, the other cast members become extra. There's no more exploration with them. There's no more depth to them. Like they're around, but the story doesn't focus on them. Persona is much more balanced, where I would consider Persona a character-driven game versus a plot-driven game. Don't get me wrong, that means there's plot, but that plot is formed around the individuals, around the characters. Whereas a plot-based game or piece of media would be like Final Fantasy tends to be plot-based. Not that there aren't great characters there, but it's the events that shape more than anything, rather than the characters trying to shape the story around them. And it's just a very endearing, sometimes depressing, sometimes really exciting and enjoyable game. Plus, there's a social aspect, which I should talk about more than anything, because the social aspect is what really sells the game. Any game that has social aspects, just like Persona, Trails of Cold Steel, or Dragon Age or Mass Effect, instantly gets me hooked.
I love games that are like that have, especially with it being a character driven game versus a plot driven game. Like, don't get me wrong, I love, go to point A, do this, keep on going, progress the story, and maybe I'll get some background on the characters as we go. But I love like that type of game where it's, here's the characters, let's dive in and let me spend 20 hours just doing character stuff with them and seeing how they grow, rather than maybe not progressing the plot so much, but giving me that interaction so I get to fall in love with these characters. Like that is the one thing that I love about storytelling, is getting to fall in love with characters and just go with them in their journeys.
Exactly. And that's how I run my tabletop games, and it's a part of all games that I enjoy. Other games like that would include, I mentioned Dragon Age. I would say Origins is probably the most character-driven of all of them. Inquisition is definitely more plot-driven, which is one of my major gripes about that game. And then Dragon Age 2 is entirely character-driven, but gets a lot of criticism because, it's an unfinished game. But those social aspects in gaming are what really, really fuel a fire in me. I really enjoy them. Same as I enjoy romance in games with them alongside it. it adds another layer of investment when you can have like special interactions with characters, or there's like a sequence of events in a character's storyline, or like characters become potential love interests or anything like that rather than being pre-coded in. And don't get me wrong, like pre-assigned romances for different characters, like, in the Final Fantasy series or in, I don't know, the Grandia or like other games, like a lot of them. Like those can still be enjoyable in the same way that reading a book, like reading a fantasy book with a romance can be enjoyable. But it's another level to take that sort of interactive nature that games have, even in single player games, and make them feel that much more immersive. And maybe not immersive in the way that you still know you're playing a game, but you're invested in it and you care about the characters, and it makes you want to keep playing the game and then play it again after you've beaten it. Like I've beat Persona 5, the original, 4 times. 3 of those were in a row because I just loved it so much. And then Persona 5 Royal, I'm about to do my second playthrough, like, after this.
How, just out of curiosity, what's like the average time investment in the Persona series of games?
Oh, Lord. Persona 5 Royal, I believe, clocks in at a, like, smooth 90 hours.
Ooh.
But that's actually, I find that to be a low estimate. Like, I'm on my first playthrough with the newly added section of the game, and I'm at like 120 hours easily, and I'm just getting to the epilogue and need to beat it, but my PlayStation controller broke. It's a whole deal. But they are long games. They are not short games.
Gotcha. I only know, like, playing Final Fantasy X, I had a whole number of hours, but it was just because I had to play stupid Blitzball for a number of hours just to get a weapon. I was like, okay, that's not my real time, everyone.
See, there is an aspect of that that's enjoyable. Like, I do like mini games in games, and the fact that there were none in Final Fantasy 13 is one of my biggest complaints about the game, besides the fact that it's a fucking movie that you actually are just like not really playing. I hate Final Fantasy 13 like bitterly. I'm so angry that I even paid for that game, but that's neither here nor there. With the Persona series, there's not the quote unquote mini games aren't so much like actual mini games, because there's side quests, rather, is what the term I'm looking for. But the side quests are so tied to the main plot of the game. The side quests are almost all social links, which are basically your relationships with your friends, and those allow you to unlock new powers, get new personas, and basically advance your character's abilities. And you do that all through interacting with characters. It's a huge part of the game is social investment, because that's where your power comes from. Since a persona is basically the consciousness, the id, or the subconscious part of you that makes up the core of who you are. And then when the characters summon them, they are relying on the power of their realest self, their most raw self.
I'm thinking to myself, like, I always try to evaluate time of how much time do I have to play a game. Is in the Persona series, is it something where if I got it, would I be able to play like an hour and then could I realistically put it down and save it and then come back? Or is it something where you need like chunks of time before you get there?
I mean, you could try. You definitely have the ability to save. I would not recommend getting this game unless you have 2 or 3 hours to sit down, because it is engrossing. They are all engrossing. But especially Persona 5 Royal, it's like all those hours I clocked. I haven't played it in like a month because of all the podcasts and photo shoot stuff that I've been doing. But like that time was all played in like a few days. I played that game obsessively. Like, you need time to play them. They're not bite-sized games or have bite-sized portions, unfortunately.
Okay. I mean, that's fair enough. I respect the games that do that, and it's like my thing is always oh gosh, like the kids are going to be like, I need the TV. I want the TV. What are you
Mhm.
playing? And unless it's on the computer, which I don't believe the series is.
That's I know Persona 4 Golden is on Steam now,
Okay.
so you can get it on Steam. That was done in about the last 2 weeks or 3 or so. Time is very weird during COVID hours,
Yes.
but it's available. I don't know about 3. I can't tell you about 3, and I don't know. I don't think Persona 5 Royal is. I think it's a PS4 exclusive.
Okay. Well, maybe one day,
Mhm.
10 years from now when the kids are off to college and I have my entertainment time back.
I will say that the games are very stylized and they stand up pretty well to time. Like, don't go in expecting like the most cutting edge graphics from the Persona 5. I'm sorry, from the Persona series, but you will get highly stylized animation and like interactions and stuff. It ages well, I will say.
And that's always something that I love is games where you can go back and still enjoy them regardless of the time period or how time has changed. It's one of the things that I always laugh at with my kids about video games. I'm like, I grew up with this game, and they're like, it's so boring. It's not entertaining. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, enjoy it.
It's always hard when your kids are just sort of like, we're over it, but
Absolutely. One of the games though that you had mentioned is you said is your favorite game of all time, I believe,
hmm
and that is the Legend of Mana game.
Yes, not to be confused with Secret of Mana. They are two separate games. In the same series, though.
I did have to look it up because it was Legend of Mana was not something that like instantly popped up in my head, and I go back to like the Nintendo and Super Nintendo days. I
Mhm.
actually thought it was a Super Nintendo game, and it was not what I was thinking.
No, it gets confused a lot with Secret of Mana and its sequel, because there's only like one word difference. But it is an entirely separate game, an entirely separate universe. It is for the PS1, and it is absolutely fucking stunning. That game, all the backgrounds were watercolor paintings or designed to look like watercolor paintings, and like the character moves through them. It was highly underappreciated when it came out, mostly because it had a nonlinear storyline, and it was doing that when it wasn't really standard to have that yet. So I adore that game. I can go on about that game for hours.
Well, how did you first get into that game? Was it when it was actually released on the PlayStation 1 and you stumbled across it, or did you get introduced to it?
So that game came out when I was about 6 or 7. It was bought for me by my mother. I've been playing video games since I was a very young child because my mom loved video games early on, not so much anymore. Like introduced me to Legend of Zelda and all that. And when she realized that things that were media related, like video games, books, television shows, would keep me still because I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 2, y'all. And it was because I never crawled. I started running at like 7 months.
Wow.
Yeah. So like I was a little hyperactive monster, but I could focus on those things. So she basically was like, I'm going to get this kid every video game that she can handle because it gets her to sit still for a little bit. So it was more for her own sanity than I guess my benefit. But it worked out for me. But she got me that game at Christmas when I was 7, I believe. And I remember popping it in to the PS1, the old one, the like big old gray brick,
Mm-hmm.
and starting it up. Like it has one of the most gorgeous soundtracks of all time. So the lead composer for Legend of Mana is Yoko Shimomura, who did Kingdom Hearts, Final Fantasy 15, a bunch of other games. Is a really famous composer, and I believe this was the first project that she headed by herself. I know that she was also on Super Mario RPG as a lead composer. I don't know if she was the lead for that or not, but I do know that she was the lead composer for Legend of Mana. And it is a soundtrack that utilizes a wide variety of different instruments, non-standard instruments for classical orchestra, and pulls a whole lot of influence from different areas. There's calypso influence, there's like classical influence, there's a lot of things. Like if you don't check out the game, at least check out the soundtrack on YouTube because it's amazing.
I'm definitely going to have to. I love music from like Japanese RPGs. It's something that I've loved since like Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Final Fantasy days, where I can't believe they're making this music on these little cartridges.
Yeah, exactly. I used to. So I have a copy. I have a copy of quote Final Fantasy 3, which is actually Final Fantasy 6, for the Super NES here in the States, and I can remember putting it on just in the background and listening to the main theme, the main world map theme, which is Terra's theme, for hours and hours. And it was much the same with Legend of Mana. If I remember correctly, Legend of Mana was one of those games that you could flip over and look at the soundtrack. I'm not entirely sure. I know for a fact that was the thing with Symphony of the Night because I did that all the time, but I think it might have. Don't quote me on that. But basically, the game is a masterpiece of art. The soundtrack is incredible. The backgrounds are incredible. Even the sprites are pretty advanced for what you would normally expect on a PS1 game. Like they didn't go with the weird 3D bulgy mushy squall face. They went with like very well done just animated sprites that I can still remember all the poses and motions they made. And there's so much to explore. You actually can't play every section of that game in the first playthrough. You have to do multiple runs. I've never done a run where I've completed everything that was possible in a run because you can't. And every time I play that game, up until now, I discover something new, usually small at this point, but something new. Like I replayed it 3 years ago and I discovered an NPC conversation and interaction that is completely random and it depends on if you bring the right character to another character at a singular point between missions, you can get this conversation. And I had no idea. And I've been playing this game like every couple of years since I was 7.
That is something that I absolutely adore in games, is being able to replay it for the benefit of more story instead of just like, oh, like you get with the like new game plus where you carry something over, but it doesn't really affect the game to the level like what you're detailing. I love where you can play and you get different responses based on characters or different interactions or different missions or different anything based on your what you do. Maybe you did something in a different order and you get something different. Like I love that.
You will love the Persona series because it has even more of that. Legend of Mana does have a new game plus, and there are different sections of the game that you can explore if you miss them. The one unfortunate thing about the game is that a lot of so it's non-linear, and it's a series of events that make up the storyline of the game. There's a finite ending, but the path that you take to get there is completely up to you. The problem you run into is that it is very hard to not lock yourself out of certain missions because of the limitations of the PS1. So basically, if you can't there are certain missions where if you do this one before this one, you won't get this entire storyline. And so the game has 3 major storyline events. The ending is like whatever. It's these 3 storylines that are actually like the crux of the game. And then surrounding that, there's a bunch of involved or not even involved events too. Like there's several smaller storylines as well. But these 3 main storylines, which are the Jumi, the Fae storyline, the fairy storyline, and the underworld, and the dragons, and the story of the dragons. And something that I will say too is that it is a plot-driven game, despite being non-linear. I know that sounds weird, but each storyline that you do these separate events for is part of a overarching plot line, and it's very involved on that. But despite that, you still learn to care about a lot of the characters, and like there's a large NPC pool for you to have characters that come along with you, and they all depend on what you do. And I still cry when I think about the Jumi storyline. It's one of the so I played Final Fantasy VII and this game, I think, in the same year, and I cried on both of them. So that should tell you something. Like the whole Aerith thing, and this happened the same year, and they both caused me to cry about the same amount. So that's all I'll say on that. I don't want to spoil anything, even though it's an ancient game. Came out in 1998, I believe, in the US. It's just a excruciatingly beautiful game. I have tried emulating that art style over and over again, and I've never been able to do it. I forget who the lead concept artist was, but whoever did that and the team that did the backgrounds, like, my hat's off to you.
Now, how do you still play it? Do you still have like the PlayStation and hook it up, or are you playing it in like, did they release it onto like the PlayStation Network?
So they released it onto the PlayStation Network, but it's locked on the PS3, I believe. I have that. I also have 3 copies of the original because I burned out of 2 discs, and then I paid an arm and a leg to get a new-ish copy, a new used copy. But I played that game to death. I will never be without a copy of that game. I also have it on. I had it on an emulator on my old PC, but I haven't started it up in a while. I had it on my phone at one point.
Wow.
I'm not kidding. I love this game.
That is awesome. That is like that. That is it's one of those games where you play it at the right point and it just stays with you forever. And like that, that is your game. Like that is your game. Like mine is Final Fantasy II, which is Final Fantasy IV, and the Japanese numbering. Like you play a game at a right point, it just sticks with you forever, and like it'll never leave.
Exactly. And I've only encountered a handful of people that have played Legend of Mana, but all of us are like diehard fans for it. And it did really poorly, both because of the nonlinear storyline and because it was, in the States at least, the successor to Secret of Mana. So everyone was expecting, Secret of Mana 2, which they ironically didn't release here until like recently, I think. So it got panned over here because of that. I don't know how it did in Japan because it was very different from Secret of Mana, but God, that game is so good. So good. It was a bonding point for me and one of my childhood best friends because he lent me Secret of Mana to play. And I was like, oh my God, I'm obsessed. And then I got Legend of Mana and I lent him Legend of Mana to play when I beat it. And he was obsessed. So it was a bonding point for us.
That is so awesome. I love like childhood video game stories because there's just something, it's so like innocent and pure back then of how we approached video games and what we enjoyed about video games versus like now. Like I know that I critique a lot of video games, like I'm not going to play that, or that's not for me, I'm not going to try that out. But back then, just playing a game, sitting down with it, and something where it's especially like an RPG one where it just draws you in and with story and characters and just I don't know. I have words, but they wouldn't come out correctly, and I would just ramble.
Those games that your mom tried to get you to stop playing because dinner was ready, and you were just like, no, I need to keep playing, and then they got all mad at you, and you're just like, no, don't take it away from me, and then you get grounded. Those kind of games.
Yeah, those kinds of games where I'm like, but the campsite is back like 30 minutes, and I can't get there.
Yeah,
I can't.
Yeah, been there. I've played games that, like, when I was a kid, if I got grounded and they got taken away from me, it felt like a gut punch because I had to know the story. Like, books never got taken away from me, but video games would, and like it destroyed me sometimes. Just because those are like the interactive stories. Those are the ones, they live with you just like books do, especially the good ones anyway.
Exactly. We're going to wrap up here with another video game before we start talking about tabletop role playing, which shockingly just seems so interconnected with everything we've talked about.
I know, right?
It's uncanny this conversation. It's one that I have been told to play. I tried the demo for Dragon Age 2,
Mhm.
and I had trouble controlling like multiple characters, because that's like one thing that I cannot do is run around on a map and try to like have everybody doing everything at once under my ridiculous brain command.
Mhm.
But you're into the Dragon Age series, which I've heard and I've seen people play. Very good series.
I adore Dragon Age. It's not without its problems. Like, I'll get into those later. But Dragon Age 2, you can actually play pretty much just as Hawk and be perfectly fine, because you can let the other like player characters that you can actually control just go and do their own thing, and you can give them tactics and stuff. I very rarely switched unless I was like dead. If Hawk is dead, you get switched to another character, but I very rarely switched in any of them. But Dragon Age is, it's places emphasis on character. It places emphasis on romance. It places emphasis on storyline. It is, the like progenitor of a lot of things for BioWare. Like, I think Mass Effect came out first, but I'm not really sure. But either way, Mass Effect and Dragon Age were hugely influential on the video game industry as far as dialogue trees, as far as interconnected relationships. And now, just like how Skyrim had an unfortunate effect on every single game that came out for a while, Dragon Age affected, like, Assassin's Creed Odyssey now has dialogue trees. Games that have game series that have never had them before now have them, because it builds a level of interaction and adds another layer to gameplay where you feel like you have a control to it. And in Dragon Age, you really do. Not to the degree that some people would like, but I mean, hey, it's very hard to make all those dialogue choices and interactions count like 3 games later. Like, it's hard. It's one of the reasons why they switched from Shepard in the Mass Effect series to Ryder later, although Andromeda, may she rest in peace. But Dragon Age also was revolutionary for queer characters, because it has had queer characters since the onset that you could romance. You can play a bi, gay, or presumably pan, but there's no romanceable trans characters that we know of. I don't think anyone's come down word of God, J.K. Rowling style, and been like, this one's trans. Although I do know that Iron Bull is canonically pan. That is a thing that they did throw in Inquisition, but they didn't make the trans character in Inquisition romanceable, so that's a hard point. The other problem that the series, main problem with the series, is that it started out very whitewashed fantasy. Dragon Age Origin didn't have darker skin tones until it was patched, and David Gator, the main writer, like, from what I can recollect, and I got this all late because I started playing Dragon Age, oh god, it must have been 5 or 6 years after it came out.
Okay.
But David Gator was like, I don't need to be inclusive in a Western fantasy game, which is, we all know, is bullshit. So he took some flack for that, I think. And then that got improved upon with a patch, but not nearly as well as it should have. And then they improved the character generator in 2. And like, you got some darker skinned characters, like Isabella was darker skinned. Even Fenris isn't as white as he's always drawn by fan artists, if I remember correctly. It's been a little while since I played 2. And then in 3, we get Vivian, who is blatantly black. Although the fact that they made the black character an in-game Republican still bothers me. Though I will defend Vivian to the death because I adore her, because she's a stalwart bitch, and I can admire someone who's called the Iron Lady. And a lot of the hate that she gets isn't just based in the things her character does. It's based in her race. She gets a lot of racist hate from people on the internet because, she's a black woman that stands her own, which I can appreciate it, even if I don't agree with her, just by nature of who she is. Like, Mary Kirby did an okay job, but like, it's very clear that they should have had a black writer, which another thing that bothers me. I don't believe they ever have had a black writer and they wrote a black character. So, ugh. But beyond that, not to get all down on this is one of my favorite series of all time. Some of the characters from it are just absolutely wonderful, and the world feels so rich and exploratory. Like Dragon Age Origins, you learn about the culture of Ferelden, which is the main country it takes place in, and like the surrounding countries you learn from lore, and like what you get out of Dragon Age is what you want of it. You can play it like it's a normal RPG, or you can dig into the codices and lore of it and go deeper and deeper and deeper until you're me and you've read every codex like 13 times and are now a repository of Dragon Age lore like it's real mythology. And there are people worse than me. I've known people worse than me. I've lived with people worse than me about Dragon Age. It is a dark fantasy that takes character seriously. Although I will say that Inquisition falters on that a bit. It's very weird because Inquisition was sort of like the entry point for a lot of different people. So it got critically acclaimed and it's the most successful commercially successful Dragon Age. However, when you talk to older fans of the series, they're not necessarily like people who are deep-seated fan of Origins were expecting more of a character like focused game, and Inquisition takes influence from Skyrim and having a bunch of useless quests that make the game very wide but make the plot and character very short, which is unfortunate for at least me. I know that it was commercially successful, so we're likely to get something very similar to that with Dragon Age 4, but I really hope they balance it out because I actually really like Dragon Age 2. Like, the story was there, it just isn't finished because EA rushed production. Dragon Age 2 came out 2 years after Dragon Age Origins, and even using the same engine, which I think it did, that's, like, impossible. You cannot get a finished AAA title in 2 years. Like,
yeah.
You just can't.
That is absolutely wild to think about. Like a turnaround of 2 years is like that's unheard of.
It's cruel. I weep for the like developers who had to cut corners and like crunch that hard because like games that are like I'm gonna mispronounce this, but like gating games from Japan. Those are like Majora's Mask. They reutilize all the same assets. Like Majora's Mask, every character model is either like a color swap on a character from Ocarina of Time or a few small like graphics changes, like to their outfits and stuff, but they're not fully new. Dragon Age 2, they redesigned the character models. They like changed L's, which I didn't really agree with. And like basically they just use the same engine to create a new game, and a lot of the assets weren't reused, and it was turned down like 2 years. I think that's actually correct. I think it was 2 years. I think it came out in 2011 when Dragon Age was released in 2009. And it's just, I can't fathom that. And luckily they learned their lesson to make Inquisition, but because Dragon Age 2 wasn't finished, like Dragon Age 2, the writers compared the games to like Dragon Age Origins is that high fantasy like video game, that computer game you play. They structured Dragon Age 2 to be more like a novel because you're not seeing through the lens of a war like you are in Dragon Age Origins. You're seeing through the eyes of Hawk over a period of 10 years. So you're this character in this character's head for 10 in-game years and basically seeing him or her go through like being a refugee to being a nobody to being powerful to having money to, you know, doing all these things. And I really liked that sort of tonal shift. It seemed like a natural progression for Dragon Age to take. And I wish that they had pulled some more influence from that into Inquisition, the good parts. But because the game did poorly, obviously they're not going to do that.
Mm-hmm. What I know you had mentioned Dragon Age 4, and it may take the like the Skyrim type more of the like the benefit the Like
Well,
those
it dep-
side quests and stuff.
it depends. So Skyrim had a massive influence on a lot of different games, like Zelda, like Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild, Dragon Age Inquisition. Even Andromeda had a big, like a big Skyrim sort of exploratory influence through the lens of Dragon Age Inquisition, because a lot of the elements from, like, a lot of the elements of like fort defense and stuff that were cut from Dragon Age Inquisition were actually used, I believe, in Andromeda. Um, Not like the same code or anything like that, but like some of the same sort of ideas seem to be recycled in Andromeda as far as that goes, because Dragon Age Inquisition, when it was first demoed, had a fortress defense system and a lot more environmental effects. And then when it came out, it did not have those. You can see it very easily by comparing, I think, E3 or PAX trailers. Not trailers, but videos, like promo videos. As far as what Dragon Age 4 will be like, I don't know, because there's a reason Skyrim had a lot of influence. It's because it was so massively successful for its exploratory nature, even though Bethesda cannot write a fucking character to save their goddamn life. Like, Jesus fucking Christ. Like, they tried in Fallout 4 and they, like, did okay there, but, like, Skyrim is, like, it's like the death of character. But it's really beautiful and really exploratory and really good. I mean, you can tell that they spent a lot of time on, the backgrounds and stuff that are super fun to explore, and then they spent about as much time on the facial designs for the characters as they did the characters themselves. Anyway, um like, I don't think there has been a super influential, like, massive game changing RPG in quite some time. I think if we count Inquisition, because Inquisition was phenomenally popular, maybe we can count that as a big influence, and maybe that's why we saw dialogue trees in like Assassin's Creed Odyssey.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, and I don't think anyone knows what to expect for Dragon Age 4. I just really am hoping for, like, if they keep some of the exploratory elements from Inquisition, that they also look back and see what worked in their old games, because some of those things are really well done. And there's something to be said for games being different in the series and not being recycling the same thing. Like, Nintendo makes its bread and butter off of doing that, just innovating what the old stuff is. And so there's something to be said for that. But, like, I just want them to, one, I want BioWare to not fail as a company, because Anthem failed, and Dragon Age 4, if it fails too, it's going to be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So I will buy it no matter what. But I just hope that they keep the core of what they are alive and focus on character and stuff.
That is something, especially with BioWare, because I feel like they've been in the industry and they've affected, like you said, like they have been one of those companies where they've made games that have really changed the landscape of how role-playing games are done, and with those dialogue trees and with the romances and the characters, and being able to have a variety of characters and a variety of story told. And, like, because I remember playing like Knights of the Old Republic and Jade Empire, and starting off on those games, and then kind of like I was interested in playing Mass Effect and Dragon Age. It's just like they came out at the time where I just could not play games. But I feel like that the company really does things right. And I after seeing like Andromeda, like what the reactions to that was, and then with Anthem, it was definitely where I'm like, dang, please don't disappear. Please don't disappear, because I know how much like that game company means to a lot of people.
Yeah, it's Andromeda wasn't actually a bad game. If it had come out from any other company, it would have been all right. If they hadn't massively screwed up the animation in the beginning, like, holy shit, that was some Uncanny Valley bullshit. But it wasn't. When you think of Mass Effect, you do not think of Andromeda. And that says something. If they were going to redefine their most successful series, it needed to redefine it. It needed to be more. It couldn't just be the same old stuff. And like they tried. I mean, they redid their class system to be something like more open, which is cool. But Andromeda failed to excite in the way that Mass Effect did. Like, no one thought of I don't even remember, the replicants or whatever were in that. You don't think of them in the same awe that you think of the Reapers, you know?
Hmm.
Like Sovereign, Harbinger, like you remember them. They were icons of, what it meant to be anti-human, I guess, or anti like humanoid. And like you remember them, and I can't even remember the name of the characters from Andromeda. I remember PB's name, but that's because she annoyed the shit out of me. Like, you know?
Well, hopefully, a Dragon Age 4 will be a good return to what you and a lot of people are looking for in that series. So that way, it can just build on and continue on and provide more opportunities for even better games.
I hope so. BioWare's lost a lot of their writers over the years. Their old lead writer quit. I think their past 2 or 3 have quit. So it's now, I believe, Patrick Weeks who's taken over. I just hope they can continue to do what they do and also get some fucking diversity on your writing team, dudes. Like, really? I mean, you're not as bad as Bethesda. At least you have one woman. At least. Bethesda didn't have any women writers, white or otherwise, on Skyrim. Not a single one. And all of them were like white dudes, if I remember correctly.
It's just so crazy.
Yep. But that's the industry standard, sadly, and it needs to change.
Absolutely. And now we're about to venture into the last industry of another bastion of white dudes, at least for the primarily like with the big company. Tabletop role playing is how I believe I came across you on Twitter, and it's one of the things that I'm super into, and I'm curious how you got into tabletop role playing. Was it an extension of your video game role playing, where it just was like the natural progression into that, or was it something else?
Sort of. So I started role playing on the internet. I was part of, one of those Envision board forums from like the early 2000s. And I role played a lot on Gaia Online. God, I'm dating myself here. Like I was part of this board called Tainted Hearts, which was an X-Men Evolution role playing group, and that's sort of when I stumbled into role playing. And then D&D was the first TTRPG I played. I was introduced to it when I was 14, when I and a few of my friends decided to go to the gaming club that was newly started at my high school. I didn't actually play much there, but then I made a friend, Greg, who became my DM for the next 13 years. The
Wow.
last game I played with him was last year. Last year or the year before. And that's when I hit D&D, and through that group we did, just 3 editions of Dungeons and Dragons. I'm sorry, 4. We did 3, 3, 5, 4, and 5th ed. We did World of Darkness Hunter. We did a World of Darkness spin-off that was sort of like Greg's own modification of that. We did Dread. We played, a bunch of things. And that's sort of how I got into it. And believe it or not, at the time, I thought that I couldn't be a GM or storyteller because I didn't think I'd be good at it. So I actually only started like running my own games 2 years ago when I ran I haven't talked about this yet. I guess I'll mention it here for the first time. The first edition of Fast Times at D&D High. Ran it with a completely different group offline a while back, and the group collapsed for a number of reasons. I didn't get very far into the campaign with them, but I kept it because, I had worked very hard on it, and I was like, maybe I'll be able to use this someday. Maybe I can. And shortly thereafter, I was like, after listening to a bunch of like the thing that actually made me DM was listening to a bunch of tabletop podcasts. Like I started listening to Critical Role, NADPod, watching Dimension 20. And like at that point, I realized I could do it. And then I was like, I'm not going to do anything online or at the table, like a podcast or anything, because that sounds hard. And I could never do that. Like, I'm not good enough to do that. So going like, you know what? Fuck it. Let's do this thing. Let's get this on the boards. Let's go. Who wants to play? Who's going to do it? And then I started running more and more offline games because I basically was like, I know a lot of nerds. I'm a LARPer. I know a ton of them. I'm going to use this as the audition process. So within that year that I first started DMing, I ran 4 different games, 4 long-term campaigns. I was cycling through them weekly, sometimes running as many as 3 a week. And like, these were not short games. These were all like 8-hour plus games that people would like beg me to run longer. It was really a lot. So I had a pool of about 30 players that I could pull from, and those became the cast, with the exception of Caro. And they were someone that I hadn't as a player, but I'd worked with as a member of their theater company, as we had done a few interactive theater things together. And they are well known for their role play abilities in my area. So I was like, one of the players that was going to do it dropped, and I was like, Caro, do you have time because COVID? Because they are like a professor at Northwestern. They have a lot of stuff to do. And they were like, yeah, sure. So I got Caro, which I'm very happy about. But yeah, I ran games for not very long. It's only my 3rd year or 2nd. I lose track. I think I'm still in the 2nd. It will be the 3rd next February, I believe.
Do you find that you enjoy running versus playing?
Hell yes. I love running. I thought that I wouldn't for the longest time, but I love giving players the world and letting them explore and look at the things that they dig at, poke at, and what they want out of the game, and then like enhancing that, giving them more, breaking their hearts, fulfilling them, making them laugh, cry. I adore running games. And don't get me wrong, playing is its own fun, and especially now because it's the curse of the GM is that once you start running games, you'll never play again. But like, I love the interactive element to running a game, and I love exploring other people's worlds too. But like, I just letting people run through my settings gives me so much joy, and I love just having them help me tell a story. It's an incredibly powerful and what I think a very sensitive sort of position to be in, because like, we call them games and they are games, but it's a shared space that you're living in with your friends. You are sharing this mind space where you're all imagining these characters and you're all playing different variant versions of yourself, and that can be a very delicate place to be in. And so whoever is your GM, storyteller, DM, like, needs to be sensitive to that. Not to killing your characters, because that's a whole different thing. Like, if your character dies, your character dies. But like, you do not want to hurt your players emotionally because of your game. That's the exact opposite of what you want to do. Well, okay, I mean like traumatize them. Making them feel what their characters are feeling, and if that's sadness, great. But you do not want to hurt your players as people.
Right.
As little as you can. Like, sometimes it happens. Like, sometimes their character dies and they're very upset about that. That's a natural part of the game, and you need to be delicate about that. But it's another thing to, like, I've known people who have, like, gone after their players' characters and permed them because they didn't like them. I've had people just, like, make people essentially live in their already written novel. Like if you go into a game and you already have an idea of how everything's going to play out and go, and I don't mean like plot points, like if you know there's going to be a great big battle against good and evil at the end, that's different. But if you have every single plot point planned in a tabletop game of any kind, D&D, World of Darkness, any type of setting you can imagine, unless it's a pre-written, that's, you know, par for the course, but you should be able to have them have the ability to change things and grow and explore. Because if you don't write a book, you should write a goddamn book. You should not be bothering your players because you've already decided how this plays out. You've already decided every single thing, and that's not made for collaborative storytelling. So, you know, instead of putting your players through a mediocre novel, go write it. Maybe it'll be fabulous, but it's not a tabletop game, and it never will be. Not one that actually takes its players' like core and being into account, you know?
Absolutely. That is definitely one of the things where I tend to see it more now with some of the stream games that I watch, and I kind of realize like regardless of like what the characters are doing, they're in like that story and they're not really changing it. They're not it really kind of like jumps out after the first couple shows that I watch. I'm like, okay, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for where that like the actual player characters have agency to affect change, whether it means like this happened and now the DM will like change a story the next session or change on the fly. And that's what I love. Like that character driven, you as a character are affecting what's happening, for good or for bad. I mean, whatever you are doing, like that is what I want in a game, whether I'm playing in it, running it, or watching it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, you know, there's a plethora of tabletop media these days, and I think everyone's maybe looking for something different. But I want characters to be people. Like, I don't need to watch a dungeon crawl. I don't want to watch a dungeon crawl, and neither do a lot of people I know. Like, let your players. Tabletop is a place to explore, and that does not just mean like combat. It does not just mean exploring a grid. It means exploring emotions, feelings, social situations. It means exploring this character's psyche. It means that you are in a position where you have been given a part of someone to play with as a storyteller. You've been given this creation of their mind that has influences from them or things they've seen or what they'd like to be. And they are entrusting you with that to create a place where they can play. Or you are giving them the world to play and they're designing what they want to be in that world. And then you are helping them play. It is running games has been a transformative experience for me, not just in like growing as a storyteller of interactive games, but it has also made me have a little bit more empathy, I think. Not that I lacked empathy before, but it gives you perspective on the people you know. There is no way to stay at a tabletop game and not get a better feel for the people around you and not develop a relationship with them. Even in a dungeon crawl, like if someone loses their mind over a dice roll, you know something more about that person than you did going in. Like you cannot sit at a table with people week after week and not form connections. And like that's a big draw for me from D&D. Like those connections that people form with each other are things that you can use in play that can strengthen feelings and emotions and thoughts and relationships between, whether they're between characters or between characters and NPCs or just you and your players as a concept. It's a very powerful thing. I strongly encourage everyone to sit at a table and tell stories with their friends because you learn so much about people when they're pretending to be other people. It's the closest, I think, not to get all metaphysical, but I think that sort of shared space is sacred. I've said that before, and it sounds hokey a lot of the time, but there is so much trust that goes into being at a gaming table. There is so much just mind magic and mind melding that's going on. It feels like, because you are surrounded by these people, that you have stepped into another world, that this is a place where you are becoming something other than yourself, or enhancing yourself, or being something other than what you want to be. And that can help people in all sorts of ways. Like, I wouldn't have come out as trans if I hadn't had tabletop and a LARP experience. Probably I probably would have been miserable, because I played a girl in a tabletop game and I was like, oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So games mean a lot to me, and hopefully someday I can bring these perspectives to video games. I would love to create a video game. Desperately want to, actually, but for now I am telling stories at tables with my friends.
Absolutely. It's one of the things where whenever I look back on my tabletop experience, I always go to my college group 20 years ago playing Vampire the Masquerade and doing a 2-year game with those people, and what it meant for all of us, and to talk to them 20 years later, like now, and we still talk about our shared experiences and what we as players went through with our characters and with the stories that we told. And it's never been replicated with another group, regardless of game system, regardless of the table. It was like that one moment in time for 2 years where it was this group of people just creating something so amazingly wonderful and heartbreaking and beautiful. And again, it's like the video games you play as a kid that just it stuck with me. And I seek out tables when I'm able to play, and I always want that connection, but I just it's never the same.
I know how you feel. For a long time, there was one game that Greg ran that was. I have tried multiple times to convince him to run it again for other people online, but it was one of the most transformative experiences of my life. And it was a game where I played a female character for the first time. And we played obsessively. We played entire weekends straight through of that game. I think there was a period of time where we could not handle the emotions that were spilling over from the game into our real lives, and we called it quits. But to this day, that game is very special to me. And as far as replicating that, you will never replicate the feelings you get with any group, good or bad. They will always be different, but you can get to that same level of, investment. It really just depends on you sticking with it and finding a group that meshes with you again. And that can happen. It's happened to me before. In fact, I played a game with mostly the same people as that game with the same DM, and it was fun, but it wasn't the same sort of experience. And it wasn't as transformative for me. So even game to game, those feelings can differ. I look forward to playing another game with them, post COVID, because I don't really do anything online. But it is, things change group to group, game to game. Your feelings at the beginning may not be the feelings at the end. It's always worth it to try again with new people, with new groups, the same groups, reviving something after decades,
Definitely. Now, you're also like we've mentioned throughout the episode tonight, you're DMing and have the podcast of Fast Times at D&D High, which is you have created it. You have got your group of people together to play in it. What is it about? What can people expect from it?
Oh boy. So Fast Times at D&D High is basically what happens when you throw the mechanics of D&D out of high school. You can expect hormones, teenage sweat, and a hell of a lot of angst, and also a lot of comedy. The group that I play with is wonderful, But as far as the game goes, it's about a group of misfits that have been, looked down upon and have in some way formed their own path or are trying to form their own path. And maybe someday they'll gain the ability to change things, both for themselves and others. It's very much an exploration of what happens when you become someone as a teenager who has the power to change the things that you experience, the abuse you feel, the pain you feel, and actually do something about it. Because for a lot of us nerds that grew up in, the 90s and 2000s, there's a lot of hurt there from high school. A lot of things that you couldn't change, a lot of things that you experienced that were less than ideal. And I just want to see what happens when I give those same people that live through that may have disparate experiences, the ability to change something like their own experiences. And it's really fun. It's a lot of fun. It's really funny. I gotta stress that. It's really funny. I have a funny group. Like, I'm talking all serious here, but like, it's my baby. I adore that game and I adore the players, and I think it's fun enough to check out.
I saw I think somebody had made a Twitter comment or Twitter post today about it, and they're like, what? That's it? Like, you gave me this episode 1 and there's no more? I have to wait? And I saw that and I was like, oh gosh, like I really need to make time to listen to it, because I've been digging the art. I dig the people that are playing in it, because I jumped on the Twitch channel to watch the discussion about when it was coming out. You all were talking about it, and I was like, I need to make time, and I just, time is not something that I have with. I work from home. The kids have been home since March with school. They're still doing school now. It's like I need like an hour just like to carve out, or hour and a half, just to sit down and listen and be like, okay, let me listen to my stories.
It's fun. No worries if you can't, because parenting is very hard. But the excitement around it is, really fun to get into. And like next week we premiere the second episode, and after that we go to a bi-weekly schedule. There's a Patreon where people can support us and like get rewards related to the podcast. And it's just we've been building a community. We have a Discord, and it's just really gratifying to see everyone super entertained by this, because like, if you've never done a podcast before, it's hard. It's rough. Like, it's not like playing your typical tabletop RPG. There's a lot of, for quality reasons, like we'll do a session and then our audio editor will be like, you need to redo this line, this line, this line. There was a mic bump here. There was this sound here. There was an ambient disembodied cat appearing as a ghost or something. Or birds. Birds have been the bane of our existence since it started. I do not know why. They just they've been aggressive. Just to get clean audio. But it's been worth it. Every single second of this has been worth it. And I know all the players feel the same way, and like they're all invested. Like, they handle a number of things from design. Like Caro designed the school logos. Emery, the artist that we hired, did all the artwork, and is incredible. You should go follow Emery Kielsberg on Twitter, I believe. So we have a great crew, and we're all almost, except for I think our audio editor, I believe we're all queer. I think we're all queer. Pretty sure we're all queer. And most of us are non-white. That's also true. I had to think about, like, is it? Because normally, like, the cast has been a part of the game and, like, been working on it with me for the earliest member is Nuance, so Nuance has been in on it for a year and a half now. Because I was like, normally when I think of the cast, because we've been working on it for a year and a half, and like a lot of that time was before we hired the audio editor and the artist, and interviewed composers and such. It was like I think of them first, and then I realized no, we're bigger now. So I was like, are we all still mostly non-white? And I was like, yeah, I think we are.
That's really awesome. It's something that I've enjoyed as a listener or as a person on Twitter following like different podcasts and different different things that are coming out, is just seeing more of the diversity on the podcast, more of the diversity on Twitch streams, more. I want to play in games. I want to be exposed to games. I want to be in anything that's basically not from me, like a white guy. Like I have come across Kickstarters where it's created by anybody else, and it's like it's so creative and different, and I want that. I want that to consume, whether it's listening, reading, playing. Like I want these experiences, and I'm so excited that they are now out there to be consumed, to be promoted, to be talked about.
Yeah, it's going to be more and more important because our perspectives are not present enough in any type of media, and that includes tabletop media, video games, anything. So I'm excited for this opportunity to raise our voices. Like 2 of us are Black on this podcast, and like it is very hard for Black podcasting groups to get a lot of attention. I know someone out there will be like, Rivals of Waterdeep has attention. Do they though? They are wonderful and they are talented, all of them. But do they get the amount of attention they deserve? I don't think they do. I think they deserve so much more, So it's like, I want to kick down those doors and I want to, demand attention that I deserve, which is what I do pretty much every day anyway. So that's one of my like side goals. Realistically, the goal with the podcast is to tell a wonderful story and entertain my friends and listeners. But the sub agenda is basically to be like, hey, tabletop industry, you're not ready for my Black ass, bitch. You know what I mean?
Well, I don't, but I'm very supportive of you doing that. Please kick down as many doors as you want, and if I have to like knock first before you kick it down, like I'll be happy to do that. Like, but I'm sorry, I was talking to somebody and I was like, because one of the conversations I had with someone was holding the door open, and I think it was with another member of the tabletop community, and he's like, you held the door open for me, and I was like, yeah, the point of it is I'm still going to get to go through that door at some point, but why not let you go first? Like, you, please, I do not need to be first. I can go at any time. I will be glad to hold open any door.
Well, thank you for doing that. I do think that there is something to be said for not getting a white savior complex about it. So please avoid that. But it is good to elevate voices that are different than yours,
Absolutely. Now, for people that have listened to this podcast and they want to follow you, or they want to check out Fast Times at D&D High, where are the best places that they can go to do that?
If you go to Google and you type in Persephiroth, pretty sure at least one of my many online social media profiles will show up. But I'm the most active on Twitter. And then you can check out Fast Times at D&D High on Podbean, or you can find our Twitter, which is at Fast Times D&D. That's Fast Times D and the letter D. And find us there and find all our stuff through there. And we have art, teasers, a bunch of backlog stuff up there already, and of course our first episode.
I will have the links in the show notes and along the Facebook page and website, so that way if you're listening and you're interested, just click on that and you'll be taken to the show or to Persephiroth's socials, that are out there. And I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk with me.
I'm glad to do so. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Fandom. Subscribe to us on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/talesfromthefandom to see photos, links, leave feedback, and check out upcoming guests. If you'd like to be a guest, email David at talesfromthefandom@gmail.com.